Enjah. Let's begin. So Enjah recently just changed her name to Ninja. And I think it's a really nice change. I like the name Ninja. So Ninja, I want to ask you, what brought you to the deep study that you've been doing the last 45 years, the deep study of the tarot?
Well, in the late 60s, I became interested in Wicca. And I became interested in the tarot. It was part of my idea of magical stuff. I thought, I would be able to fly. I don't know what I thought. I was going to be like Doctor Strange. That was a comic. I don't think it was out at that time, but that was my idea of what sort of living a magical life would be. I would have weird powers, astral project. I was interested in all the hidden things, which we call the occult. It has gotten a bad reputation, but really occult just means hidden. Amongst other books, I bought the book The Tarot by Paul Foster Case, which is to my left, your right. There's an image, and there's a link to buying that book on Amazon. And I read that entire book many times. It includes instructions on divination. It includes a chapter on each of the major arcana. And then, of course, because it's got divination, it explains how he would interpret the minor arcana in a divination. So I really just gobbled that up. I loved it. And then I went into life with that, and I didn't have any real use for it. And he mentions Builders of the Adytum, but I didn't know it still existed. I thought it was, some old thing that I couldn't get involved with. Plus, I wasn't ready. I was very mixed up. I had a dysfunctional family, like a lot of us. It was the late 60s, and things were starting to come apart at the seams as far as the old ways of doing things are concerned. Did all kinds of things, and then I had an experience, a transcendent experience, and what happened was I had a realization that everything is connected, and I had a realization of being God. And I realized that everyone else was God, but I had never realized that I was also God, which kind of makes sense, but it's logical, but I didn't know that. I didn't have the experience, the direct experience. So that was a direct experience. And what happened is I decided when I came back to mundane reality, I wanted to claim that experience and make it permanent, make it a permanent part of my life. I have not reached samadhi. I've had brief experiences of samadhi, but I have not reached the final realization or the final incorporation of that reality into my life. But I found out a lot of other things along the way. And part of that was learning deeply about the tarot. I studied psychology, including Gestalt psychology, Jungian psychology. I studied astrology and numerology and Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, which you see to your far right, the big poster there in color. That is the Builders of the Adytum version of the Tree of Life. So it includes the tarot keys in the position that was designated by Paul Foster Case. So that's what brought me to the studies. And then I studied with BOTA for 15 years of weekly lessons, some of which I sort of skimmed and some of which I really delved into deeply. I think that's not unusual. And then I came into Second Life, and I did not bring this study into my second life experience because I didn't know there was anybody who was interested in talking about it. I knew builders, entertainers, and people who did role play and all sorts of things, but I did not meet people who were talking about spiritual things. Then my sister Jai came into Second Life, and I had left because my best friend here had died. And when she came into Second Life, I thought, oh, well, I'll try it again. So then Jai got connected to people who study spirituality in various forms. And because of that, and she encouraged me to share what I have learned so that people from other paths can see a little bit of this path. It is very visual. The tarot keys that are provided to students from Builders of the Atom are in black and white. They're printed, and they've been printed many times, so they're kind of distorted, but each student colors their own deck, which makes it linked to your personal subconsciousness. And the deck you see on all of these, except for the Tree of Life poster, are ones that I painted. I painted them in large versions because I did it for a BOTA study group. So I painted in acrylic, which is very bright and very clear and opaque. Most people color them with colored pencils or watercolor or something, and it doesn't come out quite so strong in terms of color. Today, I will be talking about the second stage of spiritual unfoldment. Behind me is the tarot tableau developed by Paul Foster Case, who started Builders of the Atom. So he developed the tarot tableau, which shows 4 rows. The top row is key 0, the Fool, and it represents the all power or the life power. Then below it is the top row, which are the powers of consciousness or potentialities of consciousness. The middle row is the laws through which those powers work. And the bottom row is conditions which are created or modified by using those powers through those laws. Now, the second stage builds upon the first. Key 16, the Tower, represents an awakening. And this can be at several levels. On the mundane level, this would be an aha experience, which could be pleasant or unpleasant, but we learned something. The old ideas we carried, the errors that we incorporated into our personal philosophy are destroyed. At the spiritual unfoldment level, this is an initiation. This is the experience of realizing that the material is based upon the spiritual and not the other way around. The 2 figures represent self-consciousness, the guy with the red coat, and subconsciousness, the woman in the blue dress. Now, above them are clouds and yods and fire and the tower itself, the crown. Now, the crown represents the false idea that we frequently believe that we are separate individuals and that we have control over our own experience. The sun in the upper right-hand corner blasts away that crown and destroys that delusion. For indeed it is a delusion. Each of us is part of a whole, and there is only one will in the universe, and it is free, and it expresses through us. When we make mistakes, we learn from them. So even our mistakes are part of the one will, because it's all a learning experience. Each incarnation is like a class we attend. It's like we're in different grades or different schools, each incarnation, and there are things we need to learn. And sometimes people learn about the physical. Some people are not on a spiritual path during a lifetime because that is not what they need at that time. So the second stage is awakening. The first stage was the abysmal and dreadful experience of our own ignorance, which is key 15. Key 15, the devil. And we were, all of us, at some point, whether in this incarnation or in previous incarnations, we lived this experience where we were enslaved by our own base desires or by our deluded idea that the material has a separate reality, that human beings are separate beings. Now, how the second stage of spiritual unfoldment works, key 2, the high priestess receives all the input that we clearly perceive. Everything that we think, do, feel, say, notice, movies we watch, everything that we take in from our experience is recorded by the high priestess. The clarity of the memory she shows us is based upon how clear our perceptions are. It's really important to pay attention without being, distracted by a million things. Pay attention to your life. And she has a flowing skirt that becomes water. And this is wisdom that is becoming manifested. Her memory of her condensation, really, in a sense, of what we pay attention to and believe flows out and becomes a manifestation. So everything in our experience is actually composed of water, or in some cases you could call it light. But the reason it's called water is because it flows, it has ripples, it has tides, it is highly mutable. And that is directly opposed to the idea that, the material is a complete and definite solid that's separate from our consciousness. The waters of consciousness is how this is expressed in this tradition. So the waters of consciousness reflect our beliefs, our thoughts, our actions. Everything that we pay attention to is directly reflected back to us in our daily experience. Luckily, manifestation in the physical realm has a time lapse. And I say luckily because otherwise we would immediately manifest our fears. If you started thinking about bats, immediately a bat would come into your room. So the delay is there so that we don't do that. When people become adepts, they are able to manifest more quickly. And that's a double-edged sword because if a person ascends to a certain stage of spiritual unfoldment, they have to control their thoughts. They have to control their emotions, or they will manifest their fears. And, maybe they do sometimes until they learn to be more balanced. Okay, within subconsciousness, there is wisdom. And this wisdom is embodied by Key 9, the hermit, the wise man. And this is the one will, the Ancient of Days. And he is actually the cause of our desire to ascend a spiritual path. He calls us. He guides us. He holds the light for us to follow as we toil up this mountain. And this law, which is the law of response, is in our personal subconsciousness. So we don't always perceive it directly. It's an indirect thing. We don't know why these things happen, not in a conscious way, until we get farther along the path. So when subconsciousness starts to manifest something, the higher self gets involved. The hermit says, what Enjah needs right now is to have, this event, whatever it may be. And it might be a pleasant aha, a realization. Somehow something comes on the radio, a song comes on, and I think, oh, yes, that relates to my problem. I can use that. Synchronicities. And so, but it might be an unpleasant one. And frequently, these gifts from the higher self are startling. They are aha moments, but if we're caught up in the idea that we're separate beings, they can be very uncomfortable. And they can be what we would consider bad events, like an accident or an illness or someone we know dying or all kinds of things, the losing a job or those kinds of things. But there's really benevolent will behind them. That is shown by the yellow sun up in the corner. Now, one of the things that we realize when we realize we are not separate beings is that there is light. The light is hidden in the material world, but it's there. It creates the material world. And so this breaks apart all our erroneous patterns. In this tradition, we talk about the patterns that are embedded in subconsciousness. Everybody has patterns, and we're all working on them all the time. And I'm going to go back to Key 15 to talk about that. Key 15 shows us the personal consciousness, both self-conscious and subconscious, being chained. Those chains represent our patterns of behavior, patterns of thought, patterns of feeling, our ideas about the world, our patterns of philosophical beliefs. So when they're shattered, it can be pretty scary. I mean, that's why the falling figures in Key 16 show these people are terrified. Our self-conscious mind and our subconscious mind can no longer claim to be in charge. And what happens is we go on from there. If you look at the bottom row of keys on the tableau, you see on the very left bottom the devil. That indicates the darkness of ignorance and fear. But it also shows the light as it is hidden in the material world. So that when we look at the surfaces of things, we do not see the light. Everything appears to be very, very dark, very stiff, very hard, very difficult to change. Then when we have the Key 16 experience, the higher self blasts it can be one pattern that's blasted away. I mean, you wouldn't want to have all your patterns blasted away at once. But when a pattern is blasted away by an experience, then we realize that the material is not the only reality. And as you go, and that's a lightning flash of experience. So where things are illuminated, we see the true underlying reality of physical incarnation for a brief moment. That's the aha moment. Then next to that, as we go across, I'm just going to give a brief explanation of where we're going with all this. Next to that is key 17, the star. So we go from total darkness, well, illuminated a little bit by the dull light of a burning torch, to a lightning flash of realization, to starlight, and this represents meditation, the meditation of the one will, and this is also, the figure is Isis, Hathor, Hecate, Diana, you name it. This is all the feminine goddesses. This is nature. And she is unveiled in this key. So after we have a realization, we frequently get a revelation. We go, aha, the problem is I was ignorant. I did this and this and this, and that's why these things happened. So the next stage, and this is called revelation, the next stage is called organization. And this stage represents sleep. We had meditation, and now we have sleep. So in sleep, more and more light, and that is to say more and more purified consciousness is incorporated into the cells of our physical body. And this produces changes in every part of the body, and particularly in the brain, which I'm not going to go into right now, but just know that that's ahead. So then we went from darkness, lightning flash, starlight, now moonlight. And the moon always represents the subconscious reality. And in sleep, we do incorporate things that are given to us, sometimes from the higher and sometimes from our own mental realizations. So after that is key 19, the sun. So we went from darkness, lightning, starlight, moonlight, now sunlight. Oh boy. And we have the little children. So our subconscious and self-conscious mind, our consciousness, has become like a little child, like it says in the New Testament. The stage is called regeneration, where enough cells in the body have had light incorporated into them, and the ones that were not able to incorporate light are destroyed, so that we become open, naive in a sense of accepting, and we are able to have a joyful realization of what life can be. This is a very important stage, and the sun always represents the heart center. These children have yods. There are 13 yods, which in this tradition means unity and love, and there's one yod between their heads. So after that, you wouldn't believe there's anything after that, but there is. After that comes the spiritual unfoldment called realization. The body and the consciousness has been regenerated, has grown up, so to speak. The children become adults again, but they're very different from the adults they were in the early stages. And here, there you have a child. So self-consciousness on the right, subconsciousness on the left, and all these male and female figures do not refer to our outer gender. They refer to the inner genders we all contain in our consciousness. So self-consciousness and subconsciousness have a baby, and the baby is superconsciousness. Now he's being called, they are all being called out of the three-dimensional reality that we all experience into the fourth dimension. Now, the fourth dimension, according to some, is movement. But in this tradition, the fourth dimension is the realization that I am, you are, an eternal being. You were never born. You will never die. The body, of course, has to die, because at a certain point, we have to change up our experience. But we pre-exist the body and we exist after the body, according to this tradition. Then the final stage. Now we can have each of these stages at times at a lower level. But once a person becomes a fully realized, fully individuated, in Jungian terms, being, fully conscious, then the masculine and the feminine, not just being married, but incorporated into the being, so that this person, the dancer, is both masculine and feminine. She is the heavenly androgyne. So a hermaphrodite would be the physical, I guess, association with that idea. But this is consciousness. Our bodies at this point are going to remain one gender. But mentally, we are able to express superconsciousness, subconsciousness, and self-consciousness in all their perfected ways. And she is surrounded by the four creatures who represent the elements. So that makes her the quintessence. The fixed signs of the zodiac as well. So we have Scorpio is the eagle, the lion that's the higher form of Scorpio. The lion is Leo, the bull is Taurus, and the man is Aquarius. All right, so let's go back to the stage we're actually talking about, which is awakening, and I will open the discussion. Please feel free to express your thoughts, questions, comments, arguments, whatever it is, in chat or in voice. Cullen says, well, first thing I noticed is how the falling fire on top right formed the tree of life. Yes, absolutely. And on the left, there are 12. So we have the 10, which represents the tree of life, and the 10 planets, if you will, the 10 heavenly bodies of astrology, including the 2 luminaries, the sun and moon, and the 8 planets. Then on the lower left, it shows the 12 signs of the zodiac. So and these flames express the idea that existence does not depend upon materiality. And they are yods, which are flames, and they represent the hermit. He is the yod. And the yod is the crown. That's a sentence that, if pondered upon, should yield some kind of illumination. All right. Jai, can you read that second comment, because it disappeared from the screen, please?
Okay. This is a question by Vera Hai. I think I said it right. How would you suggest that start applying these things to their lives practically to begin?
Well, all of this depends upon meditating on each of the keys, that is the major arcana, to begin with, because they're transformative to the personality. So if I were to begin studying the tarot, first of all, I would meditate upon each of these keys for a very brief time to begin with, and in a smaller size. And you can use any deck that feels good to you. But I would meditate on each one of these keys one a day or more than that if you feel comfortable, and get to know them and get those images embedded in subconsciousness so that this particular deck incorporates images that are extremely evolutionary. They represent the archetypes, and in this tradition there are 22 archetypes, and that represents all aspects of human consciousness. So after you meditate on these keys or cards, whichever you prefer to use as a term, they become part of you. And whenever you need them, you can call them up. Okay, good. The Fool is very uplifting. The Fool, yes, the Fool is at the start of his journey. The Fool is the spirit coming down into manifestation, incarnating. The Fool is can be used to lift the mood. He's very lighthearted, and our soul is lighthearted. And he is always at the point of falling off that cliff, and he never falls. Okay, so the use of the key 0 is to realize that all the power that ever was or will be is here now. Now, living in the now is something we have to cultivate, I think, because we have memories, we have anticipations, we have desires, we have ideas. You know, things are happening constantly. Key 1, practical use of key 1 is to improve our power of attention or concentration. This is to still the conscious mind in a sense, but to still it by focusing on one thing. It could be an image, it could be an idea, it could be, a person, paying attention to a person. So if you're easily distracted, you have ADD or something, this key would help improve your power of concentration. Now, key 16, the Tower, has the letter Pe, and Pe represents the mouth as the organ of speech. So, you know that in the Judeo-Christian tradition, God said, and that's how the world was created. It's very interesting that sound is the first thing. He didn't imagine the world according to tradition. He said something. Yes, it's the power of vibration expressed in speech. So speech is very specific. It's not the sound of a clay pot breaking. It's formed sounds. There are very distinct qualities to the spoken word, and each of these, that's right, yes, in string theory, modern science says how matter at its very core is vibration. Yes, everything vibrates, and everything vibrates at a unique rate. Yes, Enjah, everything is about the dance, and that implies rhythm, vibration, sound, because what are we dancing to? That's right, the Tower key, key 16, is Hebrew Pe, the letter Pe, the mouth as the organ of speech. And it talks about how the tongue is an unruly member. So we have to watch our speech. And when God speaks to us through the higher self, it shatters some belief. That's pretty amazing. That's a tremendous experience. Cullen says, so might this also imply that talking bad can cause destruction like it's shown with the Tower? Yes, especially talking bad about ourselves. But indeed, talking bad about another person is on some level felt by that other person. So if you have to whisper, don't say it. And really, underlying speech is thought. Speech is thought expressed. And yes, there are levels. We have to evaluate others to know who is healthy to be around. Some other people may have vibrational levels that conflict with ours. And maybe we need to avoid those people. And Sky says, the link here is with the heart, as the tongue is seen as linked to the heart in Chinese medicine. Talking bad will affect our heart. Oh, I agree, absolutely. So we were saying that when the heart speaks, then it comes out of the mouth. And also, this is the format of creation, that out of the mouth of God comes everything. Cullen says, what does the crown represent? The crown represents the false crown of the little ego in thinking it is in charge. When we have these startling experiences, we realize we're not in charge at the personality level. But we build these towers, and the tower is made out of stone or bricks. It's actually made out of bricks, which are human creations. And we've built these false towers of experience saying, well, I'm me and you're you and never the twain shall meet, and I'm in charge of my life and you get away from me. And then suddenly we have this experience and it says, no, we are all one being. Humanity is one being, and that higher self is one higher self. For me, this was a very difficult concept because I had a very deep sense that I had been here many times and that I was this soul going through many incarnations. And to me, that was the higher self. That's not how this tradition defines it. But yes, there is a soul or an oversoul, a thread that goes through all our incarnations. And each time we incarnate, we learn something new. And so that's why we come here. Kara says, let go of the past to see what the future can be. So the tower tears itself down and manifests a new beginning. Oh, I love that insight. Thank you so much, Kara. Yes, the old is destroyed. The old is destroyed so that the new can be born. It must be destroyed. When we move a muscle, those cells are destroyed. When we do anything, if you buy a new dress, it's immediately beginning to disintegrate. The first time you wear it, it's starting to disintegrate. When we incarnate, our bodies are fresh and new, but the cells of which they're made are continually being renewed. The old has to be destroyed. And yes, it can destroy itself. And I think we see that sometimes in the world. We see destruction that precedes a new level of understanding, and I believe that the trend of history is positive. But there's always conflict. And this destroys things. It destroys human beings. It destroys houses. It destroys, there's war, there's destruction, there's revolution, there's people tearing down buildings. It goes on and on. But the old cannot remain forever. Things cannot remain forever in one form. Cullen says, is there a special meaning as to the windows being only 3 on the tower in this deck? My understanding of these windows is they could be the eyes and the third eye, or they could be looked at as being the false idea that we own the supernal triad. Now I have to explain what the supernal triad is. That is on the tree of life, the white sphere, the crown, the gray sphere, wisdom, and the black sphere, understanding. That is the highest level of reality. It has its counterparts in us. and that would be the crown chakra, the white sphere, the left brain and right brain, which would be related to the sixth chakra, the third eye chakra. So it depends on what level you're having this experience and what level you're talking about. There are lots of symbolic threes in, thank you, Enjah. Lots of interesting symbolic threes. Do you have any in mind? Okay, father, mother, child, id, ego, superego, or the windows are opening up to see beyond. Yes, that makes sense. Higher self, middle self, lower self, more triads. And if you look at the tree of life, you see there are 3 sets of triangles. The very top one we just talked about. The egoic triad, which is, and the future is always unknown. So when we project our fears onto what we perceive in the world, that's key 15. When the false ideas contained in those projections are destroyed, that is key 16. Okay, well that's in another, well, actually I think it's on a truncated mountain. You know, that's the physical world as just a little protrusion, so that, and then we built on that little protrusion ideas of our own, and we get a false sense of separation. Like everybody's in, you know, sometimes in business they talk about the, what is it, tower mentality, or there's a mentality in business that each part of a business, let's say, is separate and they don't communicate with each other. The silo mentality, exactly, Enjah, thank you. A silo mentality is what gets destroyed in this experience. We do think of ourselves as these separate individuals, but really we're part of a giant corporation called humanity. All right, so I want to talk briefly about Maslow's pyramid because it's been on my mind all week. When we go through these stages of spiritual unfoldment, we are creating what we desire. We talked about that in the first stage of spiritual unfoldment. We focus on a problem, a lack. When we go through these stages, our desires at first have to be physical comfort. If we do not have shelter, food, water, air, we cannot fulfill our higher desires. So as we go through these processes, we fulfill lower desires first, because otherwise there's no someone who is hungry cannot think about higher ideals, cannot be self-fulfilling. So we start out with simple desires, like say you need a hat. You imagine the hat you want. Then through the law of suggestion, you receive that hat. Yes, Maslow's hierarchy or pyramid. And if our conditions are really, really dark, we're living in ignorance and fear, we need to work on our basic desires first. Then as we go along, we can do these same principles, these same stages, develop higher and higher desires, so that eventually we get to creativity, self-expression in various ways, self-actualization, individuation in Jungian terms. Yes, Enjah says they are a progression. Guy says, Tell me what happens if we look at the tower upside down. That's very interesting. If we look at the tower, okay, so you're talking about in a divination, what if the tower is upside down? Now, I don't read with reversed cards. Is there somebody here who does do divination using reversed symbolism? And if so, what would you say? Because mine would be that it is a breaking up that is very difficult. I would say it would be even more difficult, but I don't know. It might be easier. They are, because they're becoming more enlightened. There's more light in their consciousness. They're falling out of the false tower, but they really are. You're right, Sky, they are rising in the sense of being more knowledgeable about what truly is. Sky says, maybe from this world to the void, back to becoming one. There, and Enjah whispers, here is the hierarchy, base to top. Yes. We go from the world of ignorance and fear all to the world where life is a joyous dance. Okay, so Kara says, and she must do divination, it is the opposite of upside version of the meaning of the card. So would be knowing the future and seeing it clear and forgetting the past and moving on. Fabulous. So the more we hold on, the harder the experience is when it is destroyed. Enjah says physiological. This is the hierarchy. Okay, can you read it, Jai? I cannot go back to chat.
Okay. Physiological, safety, love, belonging, esteem, self-actualization.
And Enjah said that the esteem of others is a reflection of our self-esteem, I think is what you said. So Enjah says, we need the experience of mirroring from others to develop a healthy / realistic sense of self.
Well, I guess in a sense I would love like a takeaway, a sense of, almost like a seed of this talk. So if you've got a wrap up little thing and then the seed for next week would be wonderful.
1:30 p.m. one of these Thursdays, I will be speaking on Introduction to the Tree of Life. So this is the second stage of spiritual unfoldment. It's very firmly based upon the first stage, which is what we pay attention to gives a suggestion to subconsciousness and brings about some form of manifestation. Usually in the beginning, the manifestations that we experience are based on ignorance and fear. So the second stage involves subconsciousness, which is, the key word is memory. So she remembers. The subconsciousness is always amenable to suggestion, is a very important phrase in this tradition. So whatever you suggest to her, she will, what we call, elaborate or manifest. So if you suggest to her that you cannot find a job, you will not find a job. Nothing will work out. If you suggest to her you can find a job, then she will begin to manifest that idea. But it has to be done in a subtle way by presenting it in the present tense and in the positive. So not. In other words, if I want a job, I say to myself at night, and in the morning is a good time, in meditation, I say, I am working at such and such company doing this kind of work. I'm very happy. I get along well with my cohorts, and I'm paid very well, plenty for me, and I enjoy my work, or something to that effect. Or, I'm in a relationship with someone that's compatible with me. You don't specify a person in a creative visualization because you are violating their personal will if you do that. How subconsciousness works is very mysterious. We do not see the workings of subconsciousness. The higher self is the one who is helping us realize our desires, and this is through the law of response. The higher self is guiding us and giving us the experiences that we need as individuals, and the higher self decides what conditions will be destroyed in this process of awakening. And usually it is some error, some erroneous idea we have been expressing and therefore suggesting to subconsciousness. That's what produced conditions that we see as dark and limiting. We do not see the light, and then we suddenly see the light. When the old conditions are destroyed, we see some form of the light. Okay, so that's the second stage of spiritual unfoldment, called awakening. This is also the Mars force, and in astrology, Mars is associated with action, blood, muscles, fighting, masculine energy, which is in both men and women, aggression, assertion, confidence, and male sexuality or projective sexuality. So as a man has outward genitals in the physical life, all of us have a way of projecting our Mars energy into the world, and it is destructive or disintegrating, and that can be bad or good. And in the end, it's always good, because usually what has to be destroyed must be destroyed. Okay, so that's the recap of the second stage of spiritual unfoldment. And your takeaway is that when you start imagining a better circumstance for yourself, the old circumstances will be automatically, and this is an automatic response, automatically be destroyed. If you say, I am in a nice apartment in the next block in that wonderful building, eventually the old pattern of having to stay in this apartment because you can't afford that old one, or whatever it is, the new one, whatever it is, the old pattern you held has to be destroyed in the process. If we have an idea about ourselves, that has to be destroyed. Okay, so next week we will be talking about the third stage of spiritual unfoldment, which is revelation. So we'll be talking about creative imagination, key 3, the Empress, and how everything that is created in cycles, that the universe works in a cyclical manner, in a rhythmic manner, as we talked about earlier when we were talking vibration and dance. There is rhythm to the universe. And the more we go with that rhythm, the better our creative visualizations work. And in meditation, which is the key word for key 17, the star, in meditation, we are working with a meditation that is ongoing. If you've ever had the experience of a guided meditation in a group of people, there is a sense that you go into the flow of a much larger consciousness or fluid substance. Some would call it the Tao, When you go with the flow of the Tao, everything is smooth. It may not be easy. It's not always easy. But it is always part of the direction. You were going with the direction of the universe, not fighting it. So that will be the talk next week.